We are in for a treat tonight. Welcome to Parent University. I think this is now, I don't know, I have lost count in terms of how many sessions. Well, we should ask Sean, who was a parent here at Lincoln Middle School and Hall Elementary School. He has attended everything.
Except for the walls.
So it's been a very, very successful launch for Parent University. Lots of people of common interest. And so if you have ideas, so after this session, you are going to receive an evaluation via email. And so please complete the form. It's very short. There are 4 questions. And then please let us know what topics you're interested in seeing us put together for you. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Barrett Wilkinson, our Equity Director, and she's going to introduce our panelists for the day and the rest of her team. Thank you, Barrett.
Thanks everyone for being here this evening. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have tonight. I want to start by introducing my co-facilitators, Izzy Smith and Alex Fitzgerald, who are seniors at Deering, both of them. And then we'll have 4 panelists who will join us after. We're going to do a brief sort of introduction to the topic, define some terms, and we've picked a couple videos to show to get us set today. So in a minute, I'm going to stop talking and let Alex and Izzy run most of the show. But our goals today are to make sure everyone leaves understanding a little bit about or more about transgender and gender expansive identities. We want to tell you a little bit about the fairly newly minted board policy. Portland Public Schools has a policy called supporting transgender and gender expansive students. And we'll take questions and we'll have a great dialogue with our panel. And so I think it's going to be really fun. So thanks again for being here. And I will get video set up. Do you want to introduce either of them, or anything you want to say about it?
I grew up like this, so it's like, transgender people are not a fad that started with Caitlyn Jenner. Before I would go to bed, I would pray, God, when I wake up, I want to be a girl. Please make me a girl. It didn't work for at least another, many, many years. I was living life as a lesbian, and I just started to slowly realize that was not me, that was not me being 100% myself. That was only just a part of myself. When I was a teenager, at the time, I would often wear my sister's clothes sometimes, or my mom's clothes when no one was around. And later, I started buying wigs and experimenting with what would it be like to present as a woman. Some of the biggest misunderstandings they have about being trans is you're trying to be someone else. No, you're trying to be you. You're trying to be you to the fullest.
I felt very alone. I felt that nobody was ever really going to understand me, that if I did speak about it, that I was going to be sent away to kind of a re-education camp. They have those available for a lot of kids.
I thought that the people that were closest in my life would be the most understanding, but they were not. It took my mom about 6 months to come to terms with it, and she realized that she loved me regardless.
I came out very, very slowly in the late 80s, and the gay community was the gay community, and sometimes the gay and lesbian community, and it was just I was invisible. Now, the knowledge is out there, And the public eye, it seems as if transgender people get more respect, but in terms of day-to-day respect, it's not 100% fixed yet. Every day one of my transgender friends goes out, I'm nervous that they're not going to make it home. I'm nervous that, when they go on a date, some guy is going to get upset that they're transgender and hurt them. I think a lot of people, when they think about trans people, they are still really holding on to some very base ideas about sex and gender that they grew up with. We've got all of this stuff that's really kind of like embedded in our operating systems.
Being trans is as varied as being a straight person. That's the biggest misconception, that if you associate as being trans, that's all you are. Like, not all transgender people take hormones. Some of them do. Not all transgender people need surgery. Some of them do. Some of them are accepted. Some of them are not. So they're vast, complex stories.
It just doesn't happen overnight. I haven't started taking anything yet.
So before my voice deepened, and I would walk into interviews and look like this, and a girl voice would come out, I had to explain to everyone what transgender was, so that they weren't looking at me like, what are you, or who are you, or, you know. And I'm pretty sure I did not get a lot of jobs because of that.
I really had gotten to a point where I thought that surgeries in particular were never going to happen for me. My insurance company, finally came around to our way of thinking and realized like we're gonna cover trans healthcare. We're going to cover surgeries. I'm on top of the world. I feel so lucky to have been able to get there and feel really at home in my body in a way that I never thought was going to happen.
Some of the greatest parts of being transgender and transitioning, going through that process, are being called man each and every day. It's more like the world externally accepted me as a woman because I realized I've been a woman the entire time. The best part about accepting and expressing my gender identity is that I don't think about that anymore. I just wake up and go about my day.
At the end of it all, this has been an amazing experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Okay, so what we have to open this conversation is to kind of start talking about the vocabulary used in this conversation.
So the first term, and probably the one that most people are familiar with right off the bat, is gender, which we have defined as, oh, it's going off. It's off. Let's try that one then. Yeah, here, trade me.
Okay, now we're good.
Yeah. Which the definition we have is the state of being male or female, and typically regarding to social constructs rather than physical attributes. So more or less identity rather than sex, I think it boils down to.
So gender is not necessarily your sex, but how you identify with the gender stereotypes in society, basically. So cisgender is somebody who identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth. So their gender matches up with their body. And then trans is for somebody who identifies with a gender that doesn't match up with the sex they were assigned at birth.
And then there are other sort of gender identities under the umbrella of trans, like non-binary, which refers to someone who doesn't exclusively identify as male or female, really like sort of not on the binary spectrum. Gender fluid is someone whose identity can change and move without the spectrum. And genderqueer refers to someone whose gender identity falls anywhere on the spectrum in general. Different terms can be used for different folks, and some folks prefer some terms over others, and
Just to kind of like explain why we have those sides, those terms are important because when we're talking about the policy, it's for trans and gender expansive students, so those are some identities that students might identify under, so just kind of to let you know what gender expansive even means. So, what is gender? Any ideas from the audience? We did just give you a definition, so like at least like any, there really aren't wrong answers here.
all right and wrong.
This is a little bit disappointing, just a little bit. Even if you can like name a gender, just name a gender.
Yeah.
Come on, somebody can do this.
Say a gender, you know.
Gender's something you're born with?
I said say a gender, the words boy and girl are like really easy. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be reading these. Okay, so yeah. I think that's the most we're gonna get.
Yeah.
So So yes, so further on the topic of gender, sex and gender mean two different things in this world now. And usually newborns are just identified as male or female, but gender is different in different cultures and different societies, and it isn't just genetic and physical.
We've also got, like, I adored this little graphic. It talks both about gender identity and how you present and how that's different from, like, your anatomy and how you were assigned at birth. And it talks about the difference between sexuality and gender, because there's, I think, a sort of common misconception that, like, if you're trans, then you must not be straight, or things like that. And I like this graph because it sort of points, like, there's a difference between identity and attraction, and it sort of puts it into a cute, readable little graphic.
Sorry about the sound, I'm not sure. Maybe you guys just talk loud for a minute.
Yeah, we can do that.
Working on it.
It's okay. Yeah, so we have these for you guys to take home if you feel like, and the reason why we have this is because it's important to remember that even if you aren't LGBT, you still have a gender, you still have gender expression, you have an identity, and you have people you're attracted to. So this is for you guys to think about your gender and your identity, because it's for everybody. So just kind of bringing it home there. And so this is our handy-dandy gender graph, pronoun graph. And so we have pronouns that I'm pretty sure everybody is familiar with, such as she and he. And so this uses them in the different tenses and has some examples for you. And then a pronoun that is usually viewed as plural, but is, okay, there we go, but is and can be used as singular for people is they, and that is a pronoun that is becoming used more widely. And then Z and here and zir are also used by people.
And this is in no way like the full list. I mean, there's a plethora that folks will use, but this is sort of the general ones. And it's always good to ask someone's pronouns, I think. Like, if you aren't sure, or if you think you're sure, there's sort of like a stigma or like a mindset that, oh, well, if someone looks this way, then they'll go with this pronoun. But just asking can be a really nice step in sort of creating a more accepting community, and knowing that there's other pronouns out there and knowing how to use them is a helpful skill, I do reckon.
And again, it's something, pronouns are for everybody. Like, trans people usually say they have preferred pronouns. They aren't just their pronouns. Everybody's pronouns are technically preferred. You have pronouns that you like. So even if you are cisgender, going back to our handy graph, if your gender matches up with your sex, it is really helpful for LGBT people if you also broadcast your pronouns, because then it's less out of place for somebody who has pronouns that might not be visible, for them to also volunteer theirs, and then everybody knows everybody's, and it's good, and nobody's like assuming things.
It's a comfortable and inclusive space.
We have a question?
So I have a question. With the they are speaking, is there any discussion about like they are speaking versus they is speaking? I mean, it doesn't, to hear it sounds...
It's, to my knowledge, the singular pronoun they is used with what would sound like a plural tense, like as if you were talking about a group of people, but it is still being used singular. So you would still say they are speaking. Whereas you would say she is speaking or he is speaking, it's they are speaking.
Not a way to say it, but then grammatically it's like they
You still wonder about the singular.
Right.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for that answer.
Of course.
So we kind of wanted to include this info because there's, I mean, with gender identity and discussion around that becoming popular and, well, more accepted to talk about, rather, there's sort of a negative air that it's like a fun trend or like some, yeah, like a phase or a fad. And this is a kind of sobering fact that this isn't something people do for fun. This is people's lives, and we're still trying to get to a more accepting state in this world, and we're working on it.
This is also a graphic to kind of explain the importance of the policy and why that it's important that it's passed, because it isn't just there because we're trying to be nice and accommodating. It's there because students who aren't being recognized as themselves suffer from that, and it can have serious mental and emotional effects. So it's just important to keep it in mind why it is so important for students' identities to be recognized. So speaking of the policy, it was passed last November with full support, and we received a lot of attention for this policy, and it is seen as a model for other communities to support their transgender expansive students. I think Breakwater School is working on a policy right now because of ours, which is really cool.
Yeah, I remember, I believe last year, we first found out about this in our Gender and Sexuality Alliance, and we sort of looked at an older model of the policy, and we worked together to revise it and to add details, and it was a big sort of community project for us. So to see that like come through and be made official during my time in school still has been really comforting and really nice to know that we're going to be leaving the school with better systems in place for the students to come after us.
So I just want to make a couple notes about the policy and then I'll let you all both continue. So it's important to know that both Alex and Izzy were some of the student voice that went into the policy, that our Board of Education spent about a year writing this policy. I'm looking at one of our board members. Which means that they were really thoughtful about all aspects of this. But one of the things that the students wrote in very smartly is that education for staff around transgender and gender expansive students is to be ongoing. And so both Alex and Izzy have spent some time along with me this school year orienting staff to this policy, talking about it, making sure everyone understands that we have this policy, what it's about, and we'll share a bit about that with you now. But so, thanks guys, because that was really brilliant. But it really does show that the importance of having young people's input, because it's their lives that are impacted by it, and that was a really awesome addition to this board policy. Yeah. All right, so do you want to do that?
All right, so here are some of the key points of the policy that are GSA.
There too.
And we have it. You can look at it, you can read it, you can eat it. So public schools will accept the student's assertion of their gender identity. The student's information will be private, as private as they want it to be, as would any other confidential student information. Activities that are gender segregated, such as like girls on one side, boys on the other, they should be avoided, and dress code should be completely gender neutral. And then a quote, students can identify and use whatever bathroom / locker room / changing facilities that align with their asserted gender, or if they choose to, be provided alternative accommodations, which basically means students can go wherever they feel most comfortably matches up with their gender and where they feel safest, which is pretty important.
Useful tips if you're someone who's cis and you want to help your friends and community and be a good ally, use gender inclusive language and avoid assumptions of other identities. A good way to do this is if you're referring to someone and you aren't sure what their pronouns are, how they identify, using they as sort of a blanket term can be helpful. It sort of reinforces the idea that gender isn't always visible and it's neutral. Ask and respond when someone shares their name or pronoun. So if someone tells you, my pronouns are he, his, even if you don't think they look like what you would assume is a boy, you use he, his. You use the name that they tell you, and you use the pronouns they tell you, because that's their name and pronouns. Elevate issues of harassment when students are targeted based off their gender identity or expression. This is something we've had some issues with in our school, where we'll have events or occurrences or things that happens where some of our gender expansive students are put at risk or feel generally unsafe. And we haven't really had any good ways to handle that, or all the responses that we've seen have been sort of not too helpful. So if you see some kind of mistreatment going on, speak up, offer a hand, be helpful, and let someone know that you're there and you care about them and their well-being. And lastly, when or if you make a mistake, acknowledge it and commit to working on it. If you want to talk on this one, I think there are some good points.
So usually this comes up when it's either if somebody has recently come out, they have changed the name, they have changed their pronouns from what you previously know them as. Sometimes people slip up and use old name or pronoun, which is completely understandable. I do it, everybody does it. But the important thing is when you make a mistake to acknowledge it, don't just let it go by. Apologize in a way that you don't have to make it about yourself. You don't have to say, oh, I've been trying so hard, I'm so sorry, I'm so bad, I'm the worst human ever. Just say, I'm sorry, I'm working on it, I'll get it next time. And that's really all that needs to be said. It's the trying that counts, even if you mess up a couple times at first.
So, with that, we're going to transition into our panelists. So I'll invite our panelists to join us, and Alex is going to join the panel too. And Izzy and I will introduce you, but you're welcome to come sit. You can move the cards too if you want to sit somewhere else. Yeah, yeah, but come join us.
I really don't want to sit next to me. It's cool, I get it.
So we've invited some panelists to help us talk about this, all of whom are experts in the community for many reasons. And I'm excited to hear what they have to share with us. So there are note cards sort of on the outside, and I neglected to put pens there, so maybe Matt can help me with pens. So if you have a question, the easiest way to manage this will be to write it on a note card and then kind of flag me down and I'll grab it. And then Izzy and I will take turns continuing the panel so we can make the best use of the rest of our time together. Yeah, we can make it casual. All right, so we will introduce our first panelist, which is not in order of how they sat, but.
Hello. So on our first list of panelists, we have Gia Drew. She is the program director at Equality Maine, and she advocates on behalf of Maine's large and beautiful LGBTQ community. At Equality Maine, Gia oversees all their education, outreach, youth engagement programs, and fights for policies and laws that protect the community. Prior to becoming an LGBTQ advocate, she was a high school teacher and coach for 20 years and was one of Maine's first out transgender public school teachers and one of the first transgender high school coaches in the country.
Alex Fitzgerald, who you've already met, is a Deering High School senior. He is co-president of the GSA, along with Izzy, and is a transgender advocate who has worked towards LGBT acceptance throughout his high school experience. He's received 2 citizenship awards for his contributions to Deering and plans to continue advocacy work while studying illustration after graduation. He also has a lizard.
Her name is Luna and she's a lesbian.
I saw her earlier. She's a very good lizard. Next, we have Osgood from Portland Outright, who will frame positive youth development and the importance of trans youth being able to transition. We'll also share importance of youth-adult partnership as a model for parents to engage with their kids as leaders and experts of learning of their own experiences. And can also speak on the importance of prevention and learning from experience of students who may be disconnected from the community and
Good. Sorry, that's a typo on my part.
Yeah, well, typo on
That was my bad. And finally, we have Bridget Tidd, who is a parent in Portland Public Schools, has 4 beautiful children, and is married to her best friend of 18 years. Bridget holds a BA in sociology and a master's in special education, and has spent most of her professional career in education, and of course working for Portland Public Schools, and we're very lucky to have all of you with us today. So thank you for your time. And Izzy and I have come up with a couple of questions, and panelists should feel welcome to speak to whatever makes sense to you, to skip things if you don't feel inspired to answer that, and we'll go from there. So I think what we'll start with is just like any opening statement, anything else you want to say, just to to further orient us to why you want to be here or what you're thinking about at this moment before we jump into questions. And should I be handing them this mic? Okay.
I will take this time to first off say, please ask us questions. We would love to teach you things, and we are here exclusively to answer them. So please ask them if you have any of them. I have not been trans my whole life. I came out shortly before high school, and I've been trans throughout my high school career. And part of the reason for my advocacy for LGBT students in high school is because though my parents love me so very much, me being trans is still something that is hard for them to swallow. So it was very helpful for me to have a daily space that I could go to, school, where I was identified by everyone as myself. And so that's why school can really be a safe space for LGBT kids. And that's why this policy is really important. So, yes.
Great, thanks Alex. Hi.
Hi.
Hi everyone. I'm going to talk about two different things tonight. I'll start with the professional side of my life, which is the work I do at Equality Maine. I've been doing for nearly almost 5 years now. And one of the reasons why it's so important and why we got involved with working on this policy here in Portland was recognizing the sort of uneven playing field across the state. Recognizing that we do have some really strong laws in the state that protect LGBTQ people in many aspects of their lives, including education, but we were lacking some guidelines and guidance from the Department of Education. And so there have been some incidences over the last several years where one school was doing this and another school was doing this. And in 2014, the Maine Supreme Court finally ruled in favor of a transgender student. Maybe you followed this case. Her name is Nikki Maines and her family, and it took the better part of 7 or 8 years for that case to finally be heard. It was one of the first cases in the entire country where a state ruled in favor of a transgender person in public schools. And I think in the aftermath of that is schools want to know, okay, what do we need to do to make sure we're making sure that all young people in our schools feel safe so they can come to school and learn. And so over the last just 2 or 3 years since that announcement in 2014, a handful of school districts have been proactive to create their own school policies that are inclusive of trans and gender expansive youth in lieu of any guidelines from the Department of Education. And so it's really great to see Portland Public Schools and other districts like Portland step forward and create these inclusive policies, because it's really important for young people and for parents and for teachers to understand why we're doing this. So I'm excited to be part of this here in Portland. I'm excited to be here tonight. So I'm going to pass it on.
Good evening. I just want to say I'm so grateful to have an opportunity to be here this evening to answer any questions as well as give some information out about what it is like to be a mom of a transgender child. I can say that as Barrett was saying, I am a mom of 4 amazing, resilient, stubborn, typical kids, and one happens to be a transgender, and she came out about 4 years ago. I had to think, and it's interesting watching that video because I don't think about it as often anymore because she is who she has always been. We just didn't know at that time. And so watching that video, it brought tears to my eyes because I can remember going through all of those stages and having all of the very similar experiences. And now I look at my beautiful, amazing daughter, and it just seems like many moons ago. But we had to go through all of that to get to where we are today. And I can say on behalf of, just Lucy, she is the most resilient, amazing, wonderful young girl, and she always has been. And I think when she transitioned, it allowed her to become free, to free herself, and it was an adjustment for us. But we saw huge leaps and bounds. We went from a child that was having severe temper tantrums to a child that, you'd say yes, she'd say no, you'd say yes, to a child who didn't even want to be here on this earth. And again, the day that she came out and said, I wish I could die,
and I could come back a girl was the day my husband and I looked and said, something's got to change. Something's got to give. And from that moment on, it was the most amazing experience from there on out. So here today to just say that if you are a parent who has a transgender child or a parent that's struggling with trying to figure it all out, I'm here to support in any way I possibly can.
Hi y'all, again my name is Osgood, my pronouns are they, them. I'm so excited to be here with all of you, these amazing panelists and to our facilitators, y'all are so great. Just to add a little bit more about sort of my perspective and what I bring to this panel. So I've been the director of Portland Outright for the last 4 years, and Portland Outright works specifically with low-income LGBTQ young people between the ages of 14 and 22 using a youth organizing model. And the way that we understand that is combining positive youth development, grassroots community organizing, and youth leadership to create what I heard Alex name as a by and for model. And Outright has existed in Maine for a long time as a space where LGBTQ young people really at the intersections of lots of different forms of oppression, the most impacted by things, could come together to be at the tables where decisions were being made about their lives and could be building the power to support themselves and their peers to be making the changes that they needed to see to be safe and to be well. So I'm really excited about that work and what we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, which is really making a commitment around economic justice and racial justice, working in the juvenile justice system, working around homelessness, to be creating policies that are really rooted in supporting transgender young people, and just making our communities a stronger place where people have the information that they need to support each other. It's been really beautiful to be in communities, to be sitting in circle with people and asking questions, to be, giving workshops and the kinds of people who come and ask us questions because they're moved by young folks who are coming and opening their hearts to them has been a really powerful experience. I think the last thing that I will just say is that, so when I started working for Outright, I was not out as trans and was a person who sort of like always knew that I was genderqueer, but felt really nervous about, about like talking to people about that, but also what it would do to what was becoming my like professional organizer career. And as somebody who grew up poor, as somebody who has always been sort of on the front lines in my community, I was really nervous that I would get pushed out of these roles that I needed to be in to keep my folks safe. Like if I showed up at the hospital to advocate for a young person, would they let me in if they read me as trans? And so I think this work that you all are doing here has ripples in a lot of ways, and I think I'm just like proud to be doing this work alongside of each other because I think it's really important for all of us in ways that we might not even know now.
All right, I've already cried twice, so that's fine. Izzy, do you want to start with the first question, or the next question?
So the question we have for our panelists are, what do you think some things can be done by schools to make trans and gender expansive students feel more safe?
Hand that off to Alex to start. I need to think about this one though.
You can pop around, whoever wants to start.
Yeah? All right, cool. It stands now. Okay, now. I will try to think on the spot. Well, okay, so we have the PPS policy, and for like the key points slide that we read off earlier, I would say those are some really big milestones that I wish that other schools would follow through with. Mainly just letting students choose what gender assigned spaces they want to be in and kind of steering away from gender segregation, because for a bit before I was a trans male, I was gender neutral, and I remember being here at Lincoln and the teachers would be like, girls on one side, boys on the other, and I'd be like, ah. So it's just good to make sure that there are spaces for people on either side or anywhere in between or outside of the spectrum.
That's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up. And I think that's a really good point of why this policy is so unique actually compared to some other policies we've seen, where we're actually talking about the gender expansiveness of this policy, where we're recognizing that so many young people are not identifying within that binary of being a boy or a girl, or even consistently that way either. And that's really important. So, you know, one of the important parts is the sort of qualitative sense of learning about what it means to be trans or gender expansive, and that it's so important to hear people's stories and what it really means to flesh out the lived experience of that. And I've had the great fortune of meeting hundreds, if not thousands, of trans folk here in Maine and across the country, and there is no one way to be trans or gender expansive. You know, there's not one journey, there's not one path, and I think that's really important. And another aspect of this is sort of the quantitative side of this is what is some of the data saying of what it's like to be trans or gender expansive today in Maine. And I'm learning a lot quickly of what that data looks like. And we can learn from it how we can implement policies, but also programs and curriculum in schools. You know, just this past year, the Maine CDC began asking questions on, you know, the statewide health surveys that all students do in Maine. And it's the first time ever they asked a question, are you trans? Which is really incredible. So in 2017, high school students are actually asked for the first time, are you trans? Which is really empowering to see that 1.5% of all high school students identify as trans, but also 1.6% don't know. Which was really cool to see that too, to recognize so many young people are questioning their gender identity and don't necessarily identify as being firmly a boy or a girl, and that there's a lot more gray area there, and that's really exciting for me. So when we are thinking about curriculum, we're talking about whether it's across the curriculum, how do we talk about LGBTQ issues, or we're talking about health class or sex ed, making sure that we are being inclusive when we're talking about the population that we're serving. So I think that's really important too. So I'm going to stop right there.
When I think about Lucy's experience with the Portland Public Schools, number one, I have to say Portland Public School rocks with how they dealt with Lucy and how they guided us through this process. I remember the day exactly that summer that we were having those conversations, Mark and I, my husband and I, as well as having the conversations with Lucy about, because over the summer, Lucy was being called Benjamin and dressing as, you know, he would a boy dress, that was what he said, I don't want to be dressed as a boy, and that's what he was doing all summer. And he says, but when I go to school in the fall, no longer Benjamin, and I'm not dressing like this anymore. I was like, great, what are we doing? So he's like, I want to wear these clothes. I want to wear the dresses. I want to have my hair grow long, and I want a new name. And I remember hearing that and thinking, okay, breathe and know that this is all going to work out. I just have to love him, love him, love him, love him, exactly who he is. And he said, my name is now Lucy. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't know if I really like that name, but, because that's really not what I was going for. But, and I said, why Lucy? Where is this coming from? We had never heard this name before. And I remember at the time him saying to me, well, don't you remember Lucy from Narnia? And remember how brave she was. And I was like, that is right. You're exactly right. There you go. That's your name. And I remember the day that we received a phone call from the principal over from LISA saying to us, Mark and I had taken the kids out and we were out on the ocean in Cape Elizabeth, and the kids were having a great time and life was going great. And that phone call came and said, okay, you have 2 weeks left. What's happening this fall? And I was like, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of, even swallowed that pill of, I had just worked out the name and just figured out we were changing clothes, and now you're telling me I'm going to have to put this child with a new name and this identity into the world. Because at this point, she was being protected in our home. And just in our neighborhood, we were just trying it out in the neighborhood. And that was even hard. I remember my neighbor coming out, walking their dog, going, okay, you had 3 boys and a girl. Where did this second girl come from? And that was really hard, but now I had to put her into a school which schools already have issues, right? They already have the bullying, the teasing, being able to be who you really want to be, and that was really hard. And I remember sitting down with Peter McCormick and Lenore Williams through LISA. I have to give them a credit because they're saying, what do you want us to do? And I remember sitting with Mark and I said, all I need you to do is let her be Lucy. Just like you would let any other child be themselves every day when they walk in this door. Whether you have a child who's autistic, whether you have a child in a wheelchair, whether you have a child with a disease, you let them come in exactly who they are. Exactly who they are. And that's all we wanted, was Lucy to be able to be Lucy. And so she says, well, I remember thinking, what are we going to do about the bathroom issue? And I remember the Nicole Maine story. And I remember thinking, I think we're protected here. So I'm just going to say, we're going to go with, she can use the bathroom she wants to use. And if that means that's the girls' bathroom, she's going to use the girls' bathroom. And we covered that base. I felt good there. And I remember them at first saying, well, should she use something, separate to start out? I go, wherever she wants to go, that's where we're going. That's it. Because she's just going in there to do her business. She's not in there for anything else. Nobody else is in there for anything else. Just go into the bathroom. Let her go. And then after that, it was about, do we let teachers know? And I felt at that point, yeah, maybe you should educate your staff. And how do we do that? And I was like, well, we need to figure that out. I think you need to figure out where Portland Public Schools is with this. And that's something that you should do, is educate your staff. As far as parents in the school, Mark and I felt, and we kind of sat down with Lenore, we didn't think an email needed to go out. We didn't think a letter needed to go out. We really wanted it to just go with the flow and allow the kids to allow Lucy to drive the bus and allow the kids to kind of figure it out, because as we all know, it's usually the kids that have it all figured out. It's usually us that mess it up, right? And so I remember that day on that playground when I was nervous and afraid and wondering what's going to happen to Lucy. Was she going to be okay? And I will never forget this moment as long as I live. It took us a long time to get outside for recess, because I remember her hiding underneath the desk in the classroom, crying, holding on to her blue bunny, crying, saying, Mom, I'm scared, I'm sad, I don't know what to do. And I remember saying to her, I will pick you up now and we will go. And she says, I can't. I have to be here today. I have to do this. I'm in school. And I said, okay, then you let me know when you're ready and we'll go. Whatever you want to do. Do you want to stay here? We'll go. She says, I'm here. And then the bell rang for recess. And mind you, everybody's looking at us. There's like the big red dot right in our face. Everybody's trying to figure us out. And I understood why. These kids were just 3 months ago, this was Benjamin with, the short hair and the t-shirts and the shorts. Now was walking in with this skirt and sort of hair long, not really. She put something pink in her hair, but really still looked like Benjamin. It was confusing. And I expected and honored everybody's questioning of what's going on. I got that. I didn't get defensive. And when that bell rang, we went outside and we stood in that playground area for a long time. And it was really hard because kids were just staring. They didn't know what to do. And I respected that, and I was like, this is gonna take time. And then all of a sudden, one of her friends from the year before came over and said, hello. I was like, hello. And I said, do you know who this is? And they're like, yeah, I do. And they said, it's Benjamin. I'm like, yeah, this is the same little person you were speaking to last year, the same person you were jumping rope with, the same person that you were chasing, the same person that came to all your birthday parties, the same best friend that you talked to on the phone. And they're like, yeah. And I go, but there's some difference, right? And they're like, yeah. And I said, this is Lucy now. Same person inside, but do you like wearing that dress? And they're like, yes. And I said, Lucy wants to wear a dress too. do you like growing your hair out long? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, Lucy wants to grow her hair out long. I said, do you love your name? She says, yeah. I said, Lucy wants to love her name too. And after a few minutes of just staring up and down, and I said, is this gonna be okay? They took her hand and they ran away. And they played. And from that day, she has never turned back. Portland Public Schools has never turned back. We as a family have never turned back. And history has been written. She is now a flourishing 6th grade student in middle school, playing on an amazing basketball team, an amazing softball team, and does dance, and is a very, very happy little girl. So Portland Public Schools did exactly what Portland Public Schools needed to do. They pretty much just allowed Lucy to come exactly who she was meant to be.
Ooh, it's hard to follow the three of y'all. Yeah, I am just thinking so much about what you all said, and I guess I would add to that and echo just trust. Like, the best thing that schools, the communities can do is to trust young people, and when they tell us what their truth is, when they tell us what they need, we trust them and we believe them and we figure out how to get them what they need. And I think there are some other parts to that. Like, I think a lot about trusting young people's process, which means, a lot of really well-intentioned adults can try to dictate a young person's process, can be either resistant or overeager. And I heard from y'all, it's really important to allow young people to transition at their pace and in the ways that feel right to them. And that includes, especially for non-binary, gender fluid young folks, not attaching sort of an agenda to the ways that folks will present, or sort of just making space for what things feel right. I think a lot about, in schools, youth-adult partnership and what that can look like with teachers and administrators and young people. I'm so excited to have students here as a part of this. I think that's a great example of the ways that young people should be at the table around these discussions. I also think those corner principles about youth-adult partnership are all about letting young people drive the bus, letting them talk to each other as well. I think having spaces where young people get to be doing peer support is so important, and safe spaces where they can just be together without an agenda that is driven by adults. And I guess I will just add that in the work that I do in the world, I see a lot of young people who could have used a safe school or a safe community, and so I work mostly with young folks who are experiencing homelessness or incarceration or mental health challenges because their schools weren't safe or their communities weren't safe, because they were pushed out of their school because people weren't asking questions, because people didn't ask what resources they needed, because they couldn't transition in school. And so I think this is the work that saves lives. It's the work that makes it possible for young people to have their human right to education. And I think as teachers, as parents, a lot of what folks can be doing, me too, as a mentor, as a director of a youth organization, I think a lot about asking questions, about coming to the table with a variety of options and resources, and trusting young people to pick which of those things are the right thing, and to really be just thinking about young people as whole people as well. So that's what I got for now.
That was a lot. Okay, so we saw in the videos, we saw some adults, and we saw a kid who was very young, and then you've all shared some experiences about either your own or other people you're connected to, and trans folks come out at all different ages. People identify as different genders at different points in their lives. So what do you think parents need to know? What do you think, from where you sit, is helpful for an audience of parents to know about transgender and gender expansive young people? And anyone can start. We don't have to keep going this way.
Yeah, no, I'll take the last this time.
Who wants to start? I'll say it back.
You can send it back over here. We'll go this way. I mean, this feels like a continuation, I guess, of what I was saying earlier. I think also, like, I work with a lot of young people whose families can't show up for them for whatever reason, because they don't have tools, because they are not in a place where they can be accepting their kids as they are. And so I think, you know, it's that same sort of thing of, like, the best thing you can do is just accept and trust your kid. I also think a lot about the roles of, like, peer support among parents. I'm really lucky to work with some incredible parents at Outright who are champions for their kids and who are folks who really give a lot of themselves to be supporting other parents in the process. So I feel like you can't, like, undersell that as a resource, just what it can look like for us to support other people in our community. And I also think similar, allowing young folks to have space with their peers and sort of understanding that it may not be, it's probably not at all personal if young folks just need to be having part of their process with their peers or with a mentor, or like that there are a variety of ways that people can get support, and that is really important to probably your relationship with them, that they're getting a variety of connection and relationship and support and figuring out who they are in all of those ways, so they get to come back to you a more full and more supported person. I feel so lucky to get to be like a bonus adult to so many awesome young people, and to get to, like, you know, be the place where they can be like, oh, my parents don't understand what it is to be trans, and to, like, be that safe place for them to work out that part of the emotion and come back to then say, like, here is what I actually want to tell you about how I identify, here's what I actually, like, want you to say to me in regards to my gender. And so I think that part of the process feels so cool in my role in this community. Yeah, I think that's what I got for now.
I think when I think of myself as a parent with Lucy being trans, I know that when I reflect back that I did exactly what I know that I was born to do as a mother, is to love my children unconditionally, to love them, and to love her through her journey, and to support her through that journey. I can say that probably the hardest part for me was probably letting go of what I thought, who I thought I had, and recognizing that when I allowed and gave the permission to be her true authentic self, that it set her free, it set us all free. And I also look at as that I didn't adapt to, you know, our family didn't have to adapt to Lucy. It was like us having to look at our world today, adapting to how the world should be, how the world should be to all children, to all young people, to every people, young and old, that we are loving, accepting, and embracing everybody for who they are. And that's where the message is. That's what the message is at home and what we teach all of our children. I mean, for my oldest is 20 years old and my youngest is in 2nd grade, I look at each and every one of them and say, this is your world, this is your life. You need to be who you are and who you were meant to be. And however you define that, I honor that, I respect that, and I love that. And to find a child at such a young age, Lucy was 8 years old, to be able to articulate effectively and say it with such determination and such bravery to look at me and say, this is not who I was meant to be. When I know at my age, and I look at my life, that I still sometimes struggle being able to be my true authentic self in so many different scenarios, that she was able to do that is such a miracle and such a gift and a blessing. And I look at my husband and I, people say you should give a pat on your back for that. Yes, but I know that it really was Lucy who made that happen, and I was just there saying, we've got your back.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
Go, girl. Tell them.
That's true. You know, I'm not a parent, and so I don't know what that feels like. But I know for my parents, when I talked to my parents, and I came out much later in life. I came out in my mid-40s. My parents were approaching 80 at the time, and you know, and they're very conservative and they're very Catholic. Well, I don't know if there's a variety there, but they're very Catholic. And they struggled, they definitely struggled to understand what it meant. And I think one of the things that we worked on was, I didn't expect them to get it. I really didn't expect them to have the ins and outs of what it all means. All I really wanted was some acceptance that I'm still their kid. And I think that's one thing that we do talk about when we're working with parents is you may not get it all, and that's okay. You know, you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to understand everything about gender identity or biology or at all to make a huge difference in your kiddo's life. But if you can be there for them and have the door open and have a meal or whatever you can do to be present and be, and this is a word that we've kind of shied away from, the word tolerant, but it actually plays a role here where if a parent can just be there and accept that this is who they are and recognize they may or may not get it. And I think that is so important in terms of the health outcomes, where a kid isn't gonna end up leaving home and end up without a home, without a family. And what we see is just being able to be there and sit with the discomfort, which is fine, and recognize I may or may not get this. I may not get it today, but maybe in 5 years I will. And that's what happened to my parents. It took them, probably my dad, 6 years for him to look at me and say, I'm his daughter, you know? And I wasn't expecting any of that, and it finally came. And so I think for some folks it may take longer, and for some folks they're right on board, like Bridget. And so I think that's important to recognize. Not everyone's gonna have the same path as a parent either. We always talk about transitioning in terms of trans folk, but I think families and parents and schools are transitioning too. And not everyone's gonna transition at the same rate. I think that's important as well. So there's my 2 cents.
So as we're talking about parents, I mentioned before that my gender has been a reoccurring conversation with my parents for the last 4 years, and I just want to say that when I talk about how they've interacted with me and my gender, I'm really not trying to badmouth them. I'm really not. It's just this is my experience and this is what I've learned from it, and so hopefully you learn something from it as well. And I've written myself a handy little list of things I would like to say. So if your child is trans, respect your child. It's their name and it's their pronouns. Pretty baseline, but we'll say it anyways. You are their home in more ways than one. They always come back home and they will always come back to you. You are their corner. It is really important for them to have you there when it feels like nobody else might be. This is kind of a weird thing to say, but my friends are very defensive of me, and so know that if your child's friends are supportive of them, they will be watching you very carefully. They will be, and I don't know, take what you want from that, but just know that they will be. And if you see it happening, just be glad that your child has such good friends. Just, as was mentioned before, you don't have to know everything. You do not have to become gender expert extraordinaire, but it definitely will help you if you do some research, because you never know what you might find. You could find stories similar to yours or your child's that may just make everything click. So that's something I would, just so you feel comfortable with the subject as well. For this one, I don't really know what I was trying to say. I just heard the word love 4 times, so I think that kind of gets across. Be proud of your child for being themselves. It's really hard to do. Like, I really love that Lucy story because it requires so much courage and so much bravery, and there's lots of different milestones in children's life that parents will be proud of them for, like placing an event or being recognized for an award or something, but this is something that you can be just as proud of your child knowing themselves well enough to want to be their true self. That's something that's really hard to do, especially amidst growing up. There's enough there as it is. Listen to them and ask, definitely. Yes, ask them things. And I think that a child going through all the changes that come with being trans, and you going through them with them can be one of the single greatest connections you can have with your child. So, I don't know, it can be really amazing if you make the best of it. And honestly, as far as I'm concerned, everybody I've heard who's been a parent, they don't really know what they're doing, which is fine, but as long as like you're doing what you believe is the best, but you're also listening to your child, you'll probably be fine. Yeah.
So we've talked about what school districts can do and what families can do, but what are some things that you think the sort of general community could do to help trans and gender expansive students? Like your city or your neighborhood? Does anyone want to go first on that one?
The question, please.
I can repeat.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is, what can individuals and just people in the general community do to be supportive of trans people? I would say, just going off of the community and public space standpoint, is making sure that I'm a big fan of gender neutral unisex bathrooms personally, just making sure that there is a space for people, because even if they might want to go into one of the bathrooms, they might not necessarily feel safe and there might not be people ready to welcome them. So making sure that there is a safe extra space in case the person wants to choose to use that can be really important. So yeah, just providing space for that in communities and public spaces.
That's a good example. I like that. Yeah, so there are many different things community members and businesses and organizations can do in addition to restrooms, but it could be non-discrimination policies in businesses, it could be trans-inclusive health insurance, and so as parents, I'm assuming most of your kids are on your health care plan unless you're on Maine Care, and so even if you're on Maine Care, advocating for making sure that your health insurance is going to cover all your kiddos' health needs, regardless, maybe they're related to their transition or not, but they may be, and that's a really big thing that community members can advocate for. That's a big one. Another thing that we're talking about is also making sure that everyone in the school is educated, not just parents and teachers. Well, what can we do to educate all the students who are here? I know that's going to be in the plans here at Portland Public Schools, is how do we talk to students, which is a lot of students, a few thousand, about this. And so that's another challenge, is making sure that students are involved in the process of the education piece.
I think I would just piggyback on that I think it's just important to educate ourselves as much as possible. That's what I did, and I think that's what we need to just continue to do. Ignorance can cause a lot of problems, so if we just be more open-minded, be willing to learn, explore, and move forward in that sort of direction, I think that's a positive thing.
So many things. I think part of the reality of transgender folks being like a marginalized group of people is that our issues sort of show up in all of the different corners of community work and the hard work that we have to do to transform our communities to be safer and more welcoming. So I'm thinking a lot about supporting youth organizing, supporting initiatives that are led by young people. Like we're in a moment where young folks are more mobilized than maybe ever, who are leading school walkouts, who are taking their voices and their power back really publicly. And so I think in this community, like thinking about what we can do to support young people having power, because young folks who have power are more able to use their voices to tell us who they are and what they need. So I think, financially, emotionally, with our time and everything, supporting youth-led initiatives. I also think about policies, I think about elections, like there is a race in Cumberland County for the DA candidates right now, and that is a position that doesn't have term limits. And like that will influence a ton of policy around transgender young people, LGBTQ young folks who are overrepresented in all kinds of systems, particularly the juvenile justice system. Over 30% of Long Creek is LGBTQ because policies are not made to support our community yet. And so I think about those things. I think about our budgets and what we spend money on as a moral contract for our community members and for young people. So just thinking at every level how we are investing in young people's well-being today, their safety tomorrow, and the kinds of communities that we want moving forward. At Outright, we talk a lot about our work as building a way out of no way, and so I'm really excited to be doing that alongside all of y'all.
This is just me personally, but I was thinking about like, when you started talking about like business policies. For me personally, nothing, because we live in a capitalistic society, it's all about money here. Nothing makes me more willing to spend money in a store is if they have like a little rainbow on their window or like a sign that says like we respect all orientations, like just stuff like that. Like if you put like a rainbow sticker on your trunk, like you're doing something for the community. I'm gonna see your car go by and be like, we're in this together, you know, I don't know, just little signs of solidarity where you don't like expect them can really be helpful, I would say.
Okay, so this is actually a question for me, which is someone who is an educator in another district is curious about what the staff professional development is looking like, and so I can give anyone who wants it my email. I'm on the Portland Public Schools website, so you can get in touch with me as well, and I'd be happy to share with you what we've been doing and how it's been going. And we have lots of other people in the district that can be involved in that too and helping explain how it's been going since November. So not super long. Another question for the panelists. So acknowledge that this is potentially like kind of a hard question to respond to, but I think some of you may know just more about some of the risks facing trans and gender expansive students and what that reality is. We had one slide Alex and Izzy showed about just feeling unsafe at school, but there are other risks, and so I wonder if any of you just want to speak to that reality and that unfortunately hard truth facing trans and gender expansive young people.
I'll start just a little bit, and I really have a hard time talking about some of the negative, health outcomes and things like that, because there's so many good things about being trans and gender expansive. And I think that's really important to recognize. I know someone mentioned earlier, just the incredible suicide attempt rate for transgender people, which is nearly 40%. But there's the other side of that is 60% don't, and why is that? And I think it's really important to recognize what's working. When we talk about some of the negatives, it's always to balance it with what's actually working, and so that's important. But we do know from some of the data, just the health outcomes and the choices or pressure that young people face, especially if they're trans or gender experiencing, we definitely see higher rates of substance use, especially related to drug use, alcohol use, cigarette use, heroin use, increased rates of violence, sexual violence, particularly unforced, unconsensual sexual contact, and the list just goes on and on and on, unfortunately. And that happens for many different reasons. And so there are some really ugly looking health outcomes for young people who are trans and gender expansive, but we do know those things can flip pretty quickly with supportive community and families and schools, where a young person feels like they belong in a school, where they feel like there's someone looking out for them. Those are really powerful things in terms of what a young person may end up doing in the choices that they're making, for sure. Someone add to that? No? Okay.
I'll hop on it.
Hop on.
Yeah, so in the video before, you mentioned that trans people are a lot more likely to either develop or experience anxiety and or depression. Two are pretty commonly linked, but not always. And I would just say that the experience of being trans is challenging on its own, because it's you kind of coming to terms with yourself and also trying to, and sometimes it feels like you're just kind of trying to redesign yourself, because you want to like how you look, but you also want you want others to see you how you want to be seen, and it can be really hard to strike that balance. And so, yeah, there's just like a lot of negative feelings that can come from being misgendered, because like I've tried my best and my hardest to be masculine, but like people hear me and they're like, Jean, that's my mom. And I'm like, no. So, yeah, there's no real ending to that, but just I guess I would say that it's hard enough to be transgender by yourself and with yourself, and so when other people come into the equation, it just becomes that much more complicated.
And it sucks being misgendered, but it sucks even more when somebody is doing it and is doing it because they feel it's their right to. It's their right to disrespect you, and there's really nothing worse than that. But it is, but, you know. That's all I got.
I want to hug you after all these answers. I think I actually really like this question, and this is one I'm going to say a little comment on too. But this question was in regards to, excuse me, one of the slides we had earlier, and it was the graphics in the beginning showed that boys are in blue and girls are in pink. Why would people teaching about trans rights use those stereotypes? And I want to start off by saying, because we found it online, we didn't make our graphic, but I also want to thank the person who asked that, because I really appreciate them pointing that out. And if we do presentations like this in the future, that's definitely something we'll address, because I hadn't really realized that when we were going into this. And I don't know if any of y'all had any stuff you wanted to add on, but yeah.
As someone who is very well versed in the LGBT community and all the different gender identifiers, pronouns, and identities in general, it's so easy to just be like, God, I wish gender didn't exist. It's so complicated. But it's really important to remember that it does exist. Those stereotypes are really prevalent, and just to make things understandable to people who have lived with those stereotypes and nothing but their whole lives, you also have to use them in order for your points to be recognized, I would say.
I find that question very interesting, because I know for myself, before Lucy transitioned, that I grew up with the same stereotypes. Boys were blue and girls had pink, and girls wore the dresses and the boys had the pants and they had the baseball caps, and girls could play around with makeup and boys couldn't. And I fit into that same, way of thinking. And I remember when Lucy came out, it was just her saying, well, I just, I want to wear the dress because this is who I am. And I thought, where did this all begin, that only, the girls can have the dresses and the boys have to wear like this? And I remember in counseling talking about, she would want to play ball outside, and, with her friends at school, and she would say, well, I want to run around and I want to get dirty. And I can remember someone saying, well, you can't let her get dirty. She's in a dress. And I'm like, well, who cares if she's like, only boys can get dirty, but girls can't get rough and tough. Like, they can do that too. And so I think it was really trying to kind of break down that, that old language and the old way of thinking of that boys can do certain things. Boys are the only ones that can do football and girls are the only ones that can do dance. Well, no. It was interesting because when Lucy, before she transitioned, that's what she did. She danced. She danced as Benjamin. And when she transitioned, it was just like, yeah, I'm going to continue to do dance. I want to do dance. I liked it as a boy. I like it as a girl. And she loved playing baseball. And she loved playing basketball when she was Benjamin. And I remember saying, after she transitioned, people would come up to her and say, well, you're not going to want to play basketball anymore. And, I remember people saying, well, that's more of a boy thing, and she's like, no, it's not. And, so I think as we have to start to, it's a different way of thinking, and I was guilty of it myself. And I think it's just because after generational, that's just how we kind of compartmentalized things and putting things in these boxes of how certain people had to be. And I saw a sign or some brochure was like, someone breaking out of this box. And I think that's what we tend to do. We immediately label, we immediately think that that's the way, a boy has to be or a girl has to be, and that's just not the way it is. It's not the way it should be. We should be able to be exactly however we want to be. And that's just my take.
I don't want to say too much, but I'm like feeling in the groove about what you were saying. I just want to name that for me, I feel like I look at pictures of myself as a kid and I'm like, oh, my gender has always actually been the same. And I think, ball cap, sort of grumbly. But I think like there's sort of this idea that it's like the trans person who is like going through a radical transformation, they're breaking out of a box, they're like coming out. But what I think feels really true for me, and like maybe for other people, we're all different, but it's not that I had a radical transformation, but that the world opened up and made space for me in a way that like was not possible when I was a kid. And so I think that I'm really excited about that idea of communities opening up, schools opening up, and making space for young people that they deserve to have.
Yeah, talking about like trans kids and what they choose to do, continuing with or going off of the stereotypes they lived with previously. I think something that's been really interesting and kind of paradoxical in my experience of being trans is I have found myself, while trying to break stereotypes, I've been confronted by people trying to make them again. Like, once I was comfortable enough in my masculinity to try wearing makeup, which I had never done as a girl, but I started doing it as a boy because it's fun and I love it. And I had people being like, well, you'll be misgendered. Like, yes, I know. Like, well, you look very feminine. I'm like, yes, I know. It's just me being me, like, as a person. Like, and just recognizing that trans people and their identities it isn't just them trying to be trans, like look trans and be trans, not even trans. For me, I am never trying to make myself look like a boy. I'm trying to look like myself, and it's just a coincidence that I am a boy. So, yeah.
Wow. Literally have not gotten through a round of them saying things without like water coming out of my eyes uncontrollably. So that's cool. I have one last question from the audience, and then I think we'll kind of transition into more informal dialogue as the group kind of breaks up. So I think this question could also be answered by other folks in the audience, because we have some school administrators, we have school board, we have teachers, because I'm kind of curious. So my job has me rooted in this policy a lot right now, in making sure that our staff are oriented to it, and that's just what's happening for right now. But so the question is, what if anything do you wish were part of the policy, the new policy, but did not make it in? And so Izzy, if you want to jump in on this too, and Alex, and I don't know, other Portland folks who are familiar with it, I'd be really curious what you have to say about that. What do you think is missing so far?
This isn't something that you can put into it because it's not something that probably goes into legal language, but I would just love it if it was like a rule for schools to be proud of their like LGBT and gender expansive students. Like, I don't know, that's just really important to me, but I don't know, like, to me the policy was very comprehensive, so I can't personally think of anything, but I would love it if somebody else did.
Take it, it's yours. Take it, Izzy.
I think the one thing I probably want to see added to the policy is, if I remember correctly, it's a bit ambiguous or as far as the frequency of training goes and what the ordeal is for substitute teachers. I think the only thing I'd want to see is more info on that, maybe including substitute teachers in on that training and making it either like a yearly or reoccurring thing. Something clarifying that is all I want to add.
Yeah, just adding on to that, in the policy, I believe all it says is it is mandatory for staff to receive trainings, but it doesn't indicate the frequency of those, and it's just talking about permanent staff. So yes, it's in there, but we would love it if there was more added to that.
That's a good point. I think, one of the things we noticed is, so there are about 8, give or take 1 or 2, towns or districts in the state that have policies. That's it. Maybe 8, maybe 9, I don't know. And so we're recognizing that people are on board maybe here, and then you may go to a different district for something else, and you were expecting something that could happen if you transition out of a district or a sporting event, and you have a certain policy here for how students are expected to be, respected, but then you go to a different venue, and they may not have the same policy or understandings. And if you're on field trips and you're going to different places, how does your school policy relate to you traveling to a field trip to a museum or an overnight to Florida and you're on band? And so I think there are some other things and complications as we move towards more districts having school policies. Having those conversations from administrator to administrator, I think, are going to be really important to make sure that you're not putting a young person in harm's way by traveling to a different district where they haven't had that conversation yet. Definitely. That's just one thing I thought of real quick.
I was thinking of an experience that we had with Lucy last year, and I wasn't aware of how it was going to work out at the time, but I remember she was going to play softball for Portland, and she had played before the year before. This last year, I was required by, this was an organization outside, so the softball organization is outside of the state of Maine. So it's baseball, softball, it was based in Connecticut. And so when she made this, it was like an all-star team. They came back, the coaches came back and said, we don't really feel like this should happen. We don't know why this is happening. She's made the team. She tried out, she made the team, but this is what this organization outside of the state of Maine is now requiring. And they were requiring for me to provide her birth certificate, a letter from her counselor, a letter from her endocrinologist, what is it?
That's good.
Yeah, endocrinologist, a letter from her principal, a letter from her pediatrician. So and this is me, because I didn't want to, at the beginning, didn't want to ruffle feathers, and I was thinking, okay, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do. So I started the process, and I remember I was outside one of the doctor's office, and I was running around getting all these things, and I said, why am I doing this? Why am I running around like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to prove something that, she's been Lucy forever, this shouldn't even matter. And at that moment, I started to make some phone calls. And I started calling different organizations, but I didn't know where to go with this. I was really lost. I had no idea what to do. And certain places were like, well, we can't really give legal advice, but from what we're feeling, this just doesn't seem right. You didn't have an issue last year, why are you having an issue this year? And so I went home and I said, well, I'm not delivering any letters. I'm not sending them a thing until I figure this out for myself. So what I started to do was just doing research. So I researched the organization that was based in Connecticut, and they were getting everything from where they supposedly were getting all this information from the Maine Principals Association. So that's where they were getting their guidelines. And so then I said, okay, then I'm going to go back to the Maine Principals Association guidelines on the internet, and found out that they had no right to be doing what they were doing. And that it really wasn't until you started playing sports in the high school level that's when they needed a little bit more information. But this was last year, Lucy was in 5th grade. And so then there was this fight going back and forth saying you need to provide this information or she will not play. She is not eligible. We need all of this information. And I said, no. You're not going to get this. And I cut and pasted all of the information that I got on the website. I sent it to them, and I sent it to the people that were the coaches. And this man still came back and said she's still pretty much not really eligible. And I said, well, and the coaches pretty much, well, she is going to be eligible. She's going to play, and she's going to be on the team. We're just going to move forward with this. After I kept saying, there's nothing that you're going to do, this is the law right now, this is what it's stating, the rules are stating that she can play, he pretty much came back and said, we're going to allow Lucy to play this year. And I just went back and said, she was going to play anyway, whether you were going to say it or not. So I think it's important to, I guess maybe, that there are probably other families out there that don't know that, and that was me just having to do my own research because there was nothing out there saying that this was not okay. So that was an area that I think we could maybe work on too.
Just adding on to that real quick, a really important reason the policy exists, it is not just to protect students, it is so the students know their rights. And that's what's really important, is making sure that students and the families of students know their rights and they know what they are entitled to and what they do and do not have to have.
Right, for sure. Yes, of course. Cool.
Wow, thank you. Okay, I think we had one or two questions. Yes.
Give it to us.
I just want to add to that, what else?
Oh, yes, great. What else? Please.
So I think the other thing that we have to think about is that we also have a lot of volunteers come to our schools. And they work a lot with our students. So providing them the training is also essential. So, because they create family as well, so it's important for our volunteers to do that, not just for our staff.
Great point. So yeah, we have lots of organizations that are partnered to Portland Public Schools who provide after school programming or actually sometimes in school programming. So definitely a great point, Grace. Thank you. And yeah.
I just wanted to add to the softball story. So I have a child also who's transgender and plays softball at Portland and ran into kind of the same thing with the birth certificate, but I just felt it was my right as a parent to omit the gender because I didn't really think that was important at the time. And they took it, but I can see so many times where the gender is asked or you have to submit this and it seems unreasonable. So I guess my question about the policy is when you sign your kid up for school or something, you have to say male or female. And if that will include a space to say like other options. Because it seems unfair that when you register your kid, then their teacher says, like it says they're male, but they come to school as female. And then it doesn't give them that space to be who they are because their teacher sees that.
So we can change that in Portland, and that is absolutely what we're trying to do. I think we're in a moment where there is some gray area, so I think for kids who had been out before, like even this week, it was brought to my attention that one student's information had been changed in our internal system, but not in Google Classroom when they enrolled. They came into this district as transgender. Like this was not something that happened while they were with us, and like some glitch had happened. So we have that gray area to deal with, which is very real, but we can absolutely, if a student does not want to assert a gender or a parent does not want to on behalf of their child, then, let's talk about that. Please get in touch with me and I can figure out who to help me make that happen. All right, Sue Ellen.
Hi, I'm Sue Ellen Santiago. I'm the principal here at Lincoln. I just wanted to say what I would also add is not something that would go into policy, but just this as an example of the district committing to doing more of this. When Alex spoke about coming to school was the only place that you could be yourself, and we're doing training with our staff to help our students and feel that way. And I would also add helping our staff to feel safe as well. We feel when we let our students go home, we worry, and we worry about them, and not just in the community, but in their own houses. And so any, commitment to continued education for families is just, I think it's critical, and so glad that you're all here. Wish there were more people, but we're gonna have more, and there'll be more people at this.
So I want to be thoughtful of time, and I want to give an opportunity for some informal conversation as people exit this beautiful middle school. So I want to say thank you, Osgood and Bridget and Gia and Alex and Izzy, for helping make this such a phenomenal conversation, such a beautiful conversation. I'm so appreciative of all of you giving your time to Parent University and this wonderful event. So with that, let's give them a round of applause.